Hi everyone, CB here, and welcome to my first ever movie review. Today, we're going to be reviewing one of the biggest animated film franchises of all time. Some of you might think it's Toy Story, some of you might think it's Shrek, some of you might think it's Despicable Me, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. In case you can't tell by the poster, we're going to be taking a look at Ice Age. All 5 of them. Now, for those of you who are wondering, no, I'm not going to be reviewing all 5 movies in this video. They're going to be split into 5 parts, starting with, well, this one. And considering that the new Ice Age movie, Adventures of Buck Wild, is coming out next week, I figured now would be the time to talk about it. With the first one that started it all, not just as a franchise, but it also started Blue Sky Studios as an animation company. So, let's start off with the film's history. Originally, Ice Age was going to be made by Don Bluth. After the film Titan A.E. had failed, Don Bluth's next idea was making a film about the Ice Age. But then he later turned it down and got replaced by Chris Wedge and Carlos Sodiana, who were at their animation studio in Connecticut called Blue Sky Studios. In 1998, they made a short film called Bunny. And because of how successful the short was, they decided to start working on Ice Age back around 1999. After so much production of the film, it finally came out on March 15th, 2002. So, it's crazy to believe that the film is almost 20 years old. So that's the film's history, but what about the plot? Well, I'm about to tell you. The movie opens with a saber-toothed squirrel named Scrat, voiced by Chris Wedge. I'm sure a lot of you know what Scrat does in these movies, right? He always has this running gag or shtick where he messes around with his acorn. And in this movie, since it is the first one to start it off, he's trying to bury it for the winter. He finally manages to find a thick layer of ice and decides to bury the acorn in it, going as far as to stomping it into the ground. However, in the process of doing that, the ice begins to bristle and crack, and miles away from Scrat, a huge avalanche of ice starts going after him because of this. Scrat briefly manages to get away from it, but ends up getting stomped on by a herd of prehistoric animals. Why are they stomping on him? Well, the bigger question is, where are they going? They're heading south to avoid the Ice Age. However, there is one animal that is not going south, and that is Manfred, or Manny, voiced by Ray Romano. Manny is a grumpy woolly mammoth who decides to travel north instead of south for reasons we will find out later. Then we get introduced to another main character named Sid, a clumsy ground sloth voiced by John Leguizamo. Sid ends up getting left behind by his family while they migrate, so he decides to go by himself. However, after he encounters 2 rhinos by accidentally ruining their meal, they chase him. Luckily for Sid, he runs into Manny, who manages to defeat the rhinos. However, after they survive their defeat, Sid decides to follow Manny so he can have some company, since he's lonely and unprotected. Meanwhile, a pack of saber-toothed tigers, 2 of them named Soto and 1 of them Diego being voiced by Dennis Leary, by the way, are watching over a human tribe. Their goal is to kill the human's child, Roshan. Why? Well, that's because the humans killed half of Diego and Soto's pack, so they're planning to kill them in revenge. The next morning, the plan starts to work. However, when Diego tries to get Roshan's mother takes notice of him and tries running away to keep the baby safe. Diego runs after her, but after Roshan's mother jumps over the waterfall, Diego gives up and heads back to the others to tell him that he lost the baby. Because of this, he's forced to find and retrieve it. Later on in that morning, Sid and Manny stumble across Roshan and his mother, and after Roshan dies while being in the lake, Manny saves Roshan, but then decides to not return him. I should point out that Sid came up with the idea of wanting Roshan to be returned to his family. But being the clumsy sloth that he is, Sid ends up failing and Diego catches Roshan instead. After some talking to with how to bring the baby back, they finally make it back up to the camp only to realize the tribe had already left. Diego, knowing well of the humans, suggests that they'd have to go to Half Peak because that's where the humans are heading. However, they have to make it before it closes up with snow. After some encounters, like fighting against some dodo birds to get a watermelon, later that night, Diego's gang catches up with him, and Diego decides to come up with a new plan. Not only by bringing Roshan along the way to return him to the family, but also bringing Manny as well as a trap. The next morning, Roshan and Manny start bonding with each other because of how, well, it's kind of complicated really, but their bonding is really sweet. After that, the gang finally heads up to Half Peak, going through some encounters, like traveling on ice, talking to Scrat, and even going down a crazy ice slide in an ice cave. They manage to go into another cave, and they see a bunch of paintings all throughout of it, done by humans. I think you all know exactly where I'm getting with this one. This is where we get to Manny's past. This is one of the saddest scenes in any film. Manny's family got killed by humans, and that's why he's been traveling alone to freeze to death. The very next morning, as they finally make it to Half Peak, they encounter a river of lava. Sid and Manny manage to get through safely, but Diego almost falls. Luckily, Manny managed to save him. After that, they travel into another place to spend the night, and because of this, Roshan starts bonding with Sid and Diego. The very next morning after that, when they finally see the human tribe, or as they get closer to the human tribe, Diego warns Sid and Manny about an ambush. This causes Sid and Manny to realize that Diego set them up. Manny, of course, is angry with Diego, but Diego begs him and Sid to trust him. Diego has a way to get rid of his gang. The plan works, so the only thing left is to make sure Manny was safe. Luckily for Manny himself, he kills Soto with a bunch of icicles. Well, technically speaking, Diego gets knocked out unconscious, and then Soto gets hurt, and then the rest of the pack leaves. After that, Roshan's father arrives to find out that Manny had been protecting Roshan the whole time. The other group of humans fall at Manny with spears, but the father stops them, and Manny gives Roshan back to the human tribe. As a way to thank him, Roshan's father gives Manny the necklace that Roshan's mother had. After he and Sid say goodbye to the baby, Diego is alive, and they decide to head south for migration. 20,000 years later, Scrat is frozen in an ice block along with his acorn, and he arrives on a tropical island. As Scrat tries to get the acorn, the water washes it away, which makes Scrat enraged. Luckily for him, he finds a coconut from a palm tree and decides to do the exact same thing he did at the beginning of the film, only this time causing a volcano eruption, thus ending the movie entirely. Oh my goodness. I just rewatched this movie last night, and let me tell you, it was a lot of fun seeing it again, especially now as an adult. I can really relate to everything that happens in here. The movie does have some comedic moments, but it also has some very serious moments too. It doesn't always rely on comedy. It can rely on really emotional stuff to get the audience their attention, as to show how they might feel about losing someone or getting left behind. And that is one thing that a lot of the sequels, specifically the fourth and fifth one, kind of forget. But I'll get to those when we get to those, I promise you. Right now, let's talk about the first one. What are my thoughts on this movie? The animation, while not really good, it's not really bad either. It just doesn't hold up well, even after almost 20 years. But at the same time, this was Blue Sky Studios' first attempt at making a feature film, and they really tried. How about the voice cast? Well, of course, we have John Leguizamo as Sid, doing that iconic lisp that he has when he's talking. We have Ray Romano voicing Manny, the moody mammoth, as Sid calls him. And then we have Diego, voiced by Dennis Leary, of course, who seems like the main villain of the film, but he does get redeemed in the end, and is now part of the trio. And then, of course, there's Scrat, voiced by Chris Wedge, who has a lot of funny slapstick moments. And, yeah, the animation actually really works with it. Given the fact that this is what started Blue Sky as an animation studio, it's kind of sad how it became so popular to the point where the studio met a big downfall. But, like I said, I'll get to that when we get to the later movies. I promise you that. So, what would I give this movie? Like, what would I say about it? Well, I still think the movie's pretty good. It may have some issues here and there, like, well, the animation itself, but the movie really isn't that bad. It's enjoyable, it's funny, and it can really be serious, too. And, yeah. Now, there is one question a lot of people were asking: what about the humans? Well, I'd like to address them in here, but I'm going to address that more when we talk about the second movie, which will be tomorrow. So, yeah, that was my review on Ice Age, and again, like I said, it's a pretty good movie, so, yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow when we talk about Ice Age 2: The Meltdown.